Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Neil Brown. As the announcer said, I'm a managing director at the KKR Global Institute and KKR Global Infrastructure Business, and also a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and have the privilege to join several friends here for a discussion on manufacturing. Good news, manufacturing is back, better than ever. At least that's what policymakers here in Washington and around the world would like to happen, whether that's for reasons of geopolitics or economic competitiveness or job creation or climate change and resilience or pandemics. Lots of attention, lots of policy, but it turns out you actually have to build that. You have to finance that. You have to build sustainable companies. Economically and environmentally, and we have a number of leaders in industry who are doing that as their day jobs. So that's what we're going to discuss for the next 45 minutes or so. Let me do some very short introductions. First, to my left, Brandon Spencer is the president of the Motion Business Area at ABB, a global technology leader, both Brandon personally and ABB, in electrification and automation that uses engineering and digitization expertise to help industries be more productive and sustainable. We're also joined by Catherine Hunt-Ryan. She's president of manufacturing and technology at Bechtel, one of the largest global engineering and construction firms, where she oversees the delivery of mega projects for the semiconductor, digital infrastructure and data center, and electric vehicle sectors. To her left is Julian Mylchreest. He serves as Executive Vice Chairman at Bank of America, where he advises global clients on major strategic transactions using his deep experience across the natural resources, energy, and infrastructure sectors. And finally, Karthik Ramanna. He's a professor of business and public policy at the University of Oxford's Blavatnik School of Government and co-founder and principal investigator of the nonprofit E-Liability Institute, which is working toward energy abundance through robust accounting for emissions efficiencies. So let's start, if I could, with Brandon and Catherine. I mentioned already the real focus in public policy on industrial policy. Reindustrialization is happening at a time, of course, of immense change in digitization, in energy transition. Your businesses are both literally at the front lines of this, building and engineering the infrastructure, the factories that make all of this happen. What do you think are the core ingredients for industrial competitiveness in the years ahead?
It's a great question. I'll start out by saying thank you for having us on the panel. Maybe just as a start for grounding, what do we mean when we say that there's industrialization that's happening? There's an increase in scale and complexity, but what does that really mean? And I'll speak, especially in terms of the infrastructure, the capacity that is needed to build tomorrow's semiconductors, tomorrow's data centers, and a lot of the infrastructure that's needed for them. It really is an increase in scale, complexity, cost, coordination. It's more change. Just for context, it's not uncommon that a, quote, project that would be part of these industries, whether it's a large data center, it's a semiconductor manufacturing capacity, that a single project from a total installed cost perspective, if it were to appear on the Fortune 100 list, it would be about number 100, about $30 billion now that's an annual revenue for Fortune 100, but a single project is in the, can, I'll say, easily be in the $30 billion range. And so just that sheer scale and size, complexity is a step change that needs to be planned for. So if we're planning for that, what are some key ingredients for eventual success? Many, but I would highlight three that keep on coming up, at least from our perspective at Bechtel. The first is predictability. I like to use my hands here. The first is predictability. The second is investment in differentiation. And the third is deep knowledge and real obsession over the way that things work. So maybe just a minute on what do those three things mean. In terms of predictability, that's policy, that's investment decisions. If you are any part of the supply chain or the companies that are part of a $30 billion project or more, you have to have the visibility. It's so capital intensive. You have to have the visibility that return on investment, that your supply chain will move there. So predictability to support a long-term capital intensive industry is absolutely critical. You know, from a Bechtel perspective, what does that look like? Why is predictability important? It allows us to unleash our colleagues and look at how we can continue to iterate, to perform, to do better over time, to execute in terms of programmatic delivery, where we found, whether it's in the energy sector or elsewhere, it's that programmatic implementation that allows you to reduce cost, reduce schedule, and make improvements over time. So that's predictability. The second, investment in differentiation, and I'd say in particular, it's investment in the process differentiation. How over time can that be made better? And again, from a company perspective, one of the things that we do in investing in the process of differentiation is attack the critical path, attack the main risks of a job that will make it, could make it unsuccessful, whether that's in terms of controlling some of the supply chain, on critical pipe, on critical steel, or on having even better relationships with craft professional labor in order to mobilize for things. And the last, I would just say again, deep knowledge on really understanding the way that things work. There's a great book entitled The Way Things Work. And in order to really be, to establish competency, you need to have knowledge and deep subject matter expertise at every seam. You can't be at the 40,000 foot level. You need to have really, really deep competency to understand the interfaces and the interdependencies. So those are the predictability, investment, and differentiation, and deep knowledge into the way that things work would be the parting words.
Thank you. Brandon?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's great to be here with our customers. It's great to share the panel with one of our key customers and talk a little bit about what ABB is doing in this space. As you said, we're kind of at the crossroads. U.S., largest market for us. We've put $15 billion of capital, which at these kind of conferences doesn't sound as big of a number, but for us as a manufacturer of equipment and solutions, it is a very large investment into brick and mortar and technology in one location. And so when I think about what does it take to be successful, or kind of the reshoring or industrialization, reindustrialization here in the U.S., we think a lot about people, we think about technology, we think about policy. And if I kind of work backwards on that, on the policy side, consistency. So what do we do in the communities that we serve? How do we have some sort of consistency that's a thread? Because much like the facilities that are being built by Bechtel, these are not short-term investments. These are 20, 30, 40-year plants that are going to be there. They can't move that fast with policy changes every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is. So consistency, really important. A little less turbulence would always be a great thing and preferred. If I think about the people side, where can we get access to the talent that we need? Critically important, whether that's craft labor, whether it's engineering, whether it's people on a manufacturing shop floor. Where can we get that talent? So what kind of universities are in the area and all these kind of things, trade schools, et cetera. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then technology, which is where, kind of I come from and certainly where ABB comes from. And I've sat through most all the panels today, and I heard one person from Sempra talk about kind of responsible consumption. Everything else has been about additions. How do we get more? What's the next fuel source? What's the energy mix look like, et cetera? All very, very important. But so is consumption. And so, it's maybe a boring topic in some circles, but for us, it's what we live for, and it's energy efficiency. We can put 10% capacity back on the grid. So the U.S. has 1,250 gigawatts of energy in the system currently. There's ways to get electricity back on the grid by not consuming it. And if you think about high efficiency motors, attaching drives to these sort of things, you start consuming less and less electricity, 25, 30, 35% electricity. With the cost of electricity, your return on investment is exponentially shorter now than it used to be. And I'll give one example. We just did this at our own facility. We just cut the ribbon to a $100 million facility in Milwaukee that's going to manufacture for the U.S. We have geothermal for the HVAC. We have the highest efficiency motors and drives. We have solar on the rooftop. That facility will use 45% less energy than the facility we're replacing. And we did the investment because it's good for the wallet, good for the planet. And so I would challenge everybody in the room, especially on the end user side, let's not walk past savings that's available now for us to make these projects more financially attractive, better returns, and certainly leave a smaller footprint.
And it's a good point, because I think one of the themes that we're seeing across the discussions today and no doubt tomorrow is just the absolute need for energy. And if you have energy literally just being wasted, whether that's in transmission or in the factories, why not capture it? But you both touched on policy as one input. So let's stick with policy for a minute and then come back to a couple of the other themes you raised. For the last 30-some years or so, we've been essentially in a world of benign globalization, right? Basically, a little bit bumpy, but moving towards more integration across inputs. People, labor, finance, goods, services, technology, all kind of going the same direction, but that feels like that's over. Let's see what the latest tweet is, today. But it's not just a U.S. phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon, and it raises, I think, a question for me that I'd like to get Julian and Karthik's view on, which is manufacturing reindustrialization really a zero-sum game? And I'm not just talking most obvious U.S. and China. I'm also talking U.S. and Europe and other friendly countries around the world who are putting a tremendous amount of resource into pulling manufacturing back home.
Yeah, maybe. I think, look, to start in terms of how we see the world, I think it's definitely a more volatile and uncertain world, no question. I think it's a less multilateral world that we have to kind of plan for. But I think that also puts a challenge back onto needing new alliances and partnerships to kind of replace that. And I think that's something we're seeing more and more of. I think when your question around a zero-sum game, I think it kind of can't be, because I think you're ultimately competing for capital, right? And look, the best proxy of that is probably looking at the public markets, even though now there's at least as much going on in the private markets, but there's kind of more visible data on the public markets. And I think if you just look at what happened in terms of money leaving Europe after the Ukraine invasion, and prices going up and the response as a result, you saw a lot of money shift to the US, right? So if you look at where we are now, for every $100 that left for the US post-Ukraine, you've seen about 15 flow back into Europe, and virtually all of that's happened in the last 6 months, which kind of reflects a little bit of the sort of the dynamics. And so I think you've always are going to have, in my mind, Neil, that kind of competition for capital, and that money is ultimately going to flow to relative attractiveness, relative profitability, and cost. So are things getting harder, to your question? I think, yes, they are. But I think, look, if you look at what's going to happen with sort of tariffs and so on, we certainly see a trend towards more, let's call it friend-shoring and near-shoring, rather than actually sort of full reshoring. I think ultimately in the US, you're going to see what's the sort of skills level that you have, and have you already, with quite a bit of reshoring already having taken place, frankly, over the last sort of 5-6 years in the States, before the sort of tariff shifts. I think you're going to see quite a big push to say, look, how do we drive costs down? And that sort of nearshoring, friendshoring, I think, is still going to be a big impact. I think you'll see countries that are more neutral stepping up and filling that gap. So That's I guess the sort of three things. But the other bit I think would be just, we touched on a lot in a lot of the sessions today, is just on the technology side. Those sort of breakthroughs in technology, and certainly I see that in terms of where AI, which again has been a major theme, is impacting the sort of performance of some of the energy clients I deal with, especially in Europe. So.
I want to take this question to Karthik, but since you mentioned technology specifically, for anybody, do you view specifically AI, do you view this as a collaborative effort, or is AI specifically a zero-sum effort or a zero-sum game globally?
You mean in terms of a competitive dynamic?
Yes, yeah.
Look, I think I'll give you an example. I mean, we've partnered with an AI company at the Bank of America, which is effectively taking our data in our capital markets business and using that to kind of predict how deals will get, how deals will perform and where deals will get placed, right? So can I see something like that being a sort of a phenomenon across the sector? Yeah, but I defer to our colleagues on the sort of manufacturing side in terms of how to use it.
I would just add, no is the quick answer. Definitely not a zero-sum game. And I would parse it into the use of AI, which it's irrespective of boundaries, or can be irrespective of boundaries. And so that unencumbered use of the capability and the products is something where it's to each user, if you will, for what can come of that. In terms of where the production, the process, the manufacturing that supports and enables AI is happening, it's not thus far, and it's clearly early days, but it's not. It hasn't been a little bit for everyone, in terms of the geographic distribution of it, and it likely won't be for a while. So there are some, if you will, relative. I don't know. I'd say that winners and losers, but some that are taking much more active steps to own, to house the infrastructure where that is generated.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree, not a zero-sum. I think, it's boundaryless, so we're developing solutions in some parts of the world that then flow across to other parts of the world that then cut across industries. So you lift and shift from someone who's doing bottling to someone who's doing plastics. And so I think there is a lot of benefit and scale there. And then on the kind of localization that you touched on, we have the strategy. We never went towards a global supply chain. Of course, there's certain commodities or certain things that you have to get globally, but we've executed an ABB on a local for local. So our goal is to have almost 90% of what we sell in the U.S. made in the U.S. 90% of what we sell in Europe, 85% of what we sell in India, we make in India. So that's engineer it, source it, manufacture it, sell it, service it. And so, right now that appears to be a very strong strategy. I wouldn't say that it started out that way maybe, but we've certainly now doubled down on being local for local.
Great. Listen, I'll take luck any day. All right, so Karthik, we've heard the zero-sum question here from 3 global companies. So you have some independence as a professor. What do you think?
So look, of course it's a zero-sum game. If it weren't a zero-sum game, we wouldn't have all the economic nationalism we're having around the world, right? So there's an element of truth to the fact that, China's lunch is being produced at the US's expense. That's why we're seeing that response. Now, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. That's the important part, right? So if you decide that what you want is to continue to play on the current dimensions of the global market economy, which is cost, quality, timeliness. Those are basically the 3 dimensions on which companies compete today. Then, China has optimized that game in a way that it will win every time. And that's part of the political response we're seeing in other countries. But if you say, well, there are other dimensions we can introduce into the basis of competition across countries, across companies, then it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Let me give you an example. For hundreds of years, companies competed on 2 dimensions. They competed on cost and quality, right? And then in the 1960s, we invented JIT, just-in-time inventory accounting systems, et cetera. And that meant we introduced a 3rd dimension into competition, which is so now you don't compete just on cost and quality, you compete on cost, quality, and timeliness. So whereas companies were once holding months, weeks of inventory, they could go to holding hours of inventory. So Toyota, very famously, for some of its products, holds 2 hours of inventory. And you think about all the capital that you free up as a result, right? So now that capital that that's tied up in inventory sitting in your warehouse is instead being spent on things like R&D, on product development, on marketing, on brand development, et cetera. And it becomes the basis for new value creation. So if we had stayed in the old world, where we were just competing on cost and quality, then we would have stagnated, and it would have become a zero-sum game. The fact is that if we look at the global market economy today, and we say we aren't going to redimensionalize it like we did in the 60s and 70s, it will be a zero-sum game, right? And people are not stupid when they vote for populists. They're responding to the fact that they're seeing their economic opportunity disappear. So it behooves us, therefore, to say, okay, how do we operationalize additional dimensions which are the basis for competition? One very important basis for this will be energy abundance or emissions efficiency, right? So those would be ways in which we can really sort of reset the rules of the game in capitalism and make it not zero-sum.
So let's stick with cost for a minute, and if we can stick with you, Karthik. You know, you spend a tremendous amount of time researching sustainability, emissions accounting in particular. We obviously, we're spending a lot of time on energy security these days, but we also have to look at the world around us and also consider sustainability. On cost, usually the rhetoric is accounting, and then if you account, you report, and you probably have to do something about it, it's going to be a cost center. What does your research really show about whether emissions accounting and mitigation is actually an advantage for businesses or not?
It's a great question. So if you think about accounting as a basis of reporting or, right, you know, some sort of performative communication externally, then yes, I mean, at best it is, you know, break even, but it's generally a cost center. And that's a reasonable way to look at it. But if you look instead at accounting as a way for strategic differentiation, to understand how it is you separate your product from your competitor's product, right? And differentiation was a key part of what both of our manufacturing panelists mentioned. Then it becomes a basis for value creation. So every single company that we've worked with for the purposes of piloting our emissions accounting approaches has not done it, I say, out of the goodness of their hearts. And I think that's a good and useful thing. They've done it because they think that their bag of cement is better than their competitor's bag of cement, not just on the dimensions of cost, quality, and timeliness, but on the basis of the embedded emissions in that. If I can make the same bag of cement with the same structural properties as my competitor, but for lower emissions, then there will be customers out there that will pay a premium for it. Ditto, a bar of steel is not a bar of steel. A barrel of oil is not a barrel of oil, right? If you commoditize carbon, then the beauty of it is you decommoditize all the other commodities out there, right? That's the same way in which we unleashed basically the JIT revolution. But now we can do that for emissions. So the answer, therefore, is if you continue to view it as some sort of basis for performative reporting, it absolutely is a cost. And I would say, you know, don't have more than the PR department look at it. But if you start thinking about this as a way in which you differentiate your product and earn a premium over your competitor, that's when the CFO should be looking at it and the COO should be looking at it. And that's right. So it depends on your mindset as a company. It's not right for every company because there will be winners and losers. For everyone who makes the bag of cement better than the industry average, there will be people who don't, right? But that's the beauty of capitalism. Then, you know, they have to run faster in order to catch up.
I can give a technology example to exactly what you just said. Rare earth minerals is a big topic now. Access to them, where do they come from, who controls the supply chains, et cetera. We've now created a motor with the highest efficiency that engineered out those metals into the magnet. So now we have a differentiation against our competitor. It's good for the planet, good for the wallet, differentiates us. And so I think I couldn't agree more with what you said, that you have to use it not as a reporting tool, because you can look at cost of compliance, you can also look at cost of not complying, and you might even make those decisions. But if you can use it towards differentiating yourself, differentiating your technology, then I think you're really onto something. And so I think you have to look at it as a strategic lever of how do we get a gain from this versus how has this just become a cost for the company.
Let's let's add into the discussion another cost, which is labor. In my day job, we own, for example, we're the largest owner of data centers globally. See real labor shortages in trying to get these manufactured. I'm wondering, Brandon, maybe to you, the demands for a built economy, like it has to be built. You have to have skilled labor to do that, more engineers, et cetera. Do you see this as an obstacle today? A, and B, what do you do about it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways. I'll let my colleagues talk, especially on the construction side and craft labor and other things which are better served there. But if you think about the engineering side and attracting talent to our industry, I think we as an industry have to do a better and better job of making this industry more attractive. That it's not, don't run away from problems, run at them, because these are the world's biggest problems and you have an opportunity to solve them. And so I think how we message it, how we frame it, how we recruit, because we're recruiting against other types of companies, and we have to make sure that they want to come be an electrical engineer and work on some of these challenges. The other thing is we have to manage the retirement and the graying out. If you think about the electrician side, something like 30% is retirement eligible or near there within a couple years across the U.S. That's 1 million people, 30%, 300,000. And there's a shortage of how many are retiring versus how many are coming into the trade. So even though trade schools and participation has increased since COVID, which is great, I think some colleges are also doing an excellent job of pricing themselves out of making that a super attractive option in my view. And so I think trade schools are getting a little momentum, but the question is, can we manage it with retirements and these things? So, we have apprenticeship programs. We're partnered up with universities. We're investing in STEM education across everywhere where we have 40 facilities in the U.S., and we're investing in the schools and in the YMCAs and in everything that's in those districts in order to try and be relevant and make ABB an attractive employer. There's no shortcut. It's hard work to make sure that they want to come work for a company like us and be in manufacturing.
And Catherine, can I ask you to come in this? Obviously, labor, a key issue, sustainability, emissions, a key issue, supply chains, moving around the world, as Julian mentioned. I mean, Bechtel is known for building some of the most complex projects in the world. I mean, I think it's fair to say. Not just big, super complex, right? Could you talk about how, I mean, you use the examples of $30 billion fabs and these similar scale. How have you had to adjust your approach to risk given the complexity around the world and frankly at home on a number of these issues, and knowing as your customer in some of these, the customers demand a lot. They demand you to be on time, on budget, and if you're not, then you have to wear the cost.
That's an intimidating question coming from your customers for some of you that don't know.
Yeah, that was unfair. Forget about the last part.
We're open for the response. So I'd say maybe split it into the way, particularly coming from your customer, it feels like one of your annual performance reviews when you're like, wait, we got to break this down into behaviors we want to continue and things we want to consider, right? So I'm going to do a continue, consider answer here. The continues, I would highlight a few things, which is, and this is in terms of, how do you manage complexity around the world as scale and scale and scope is increasing so much. You need to continue to prioritize competency. There is no replacement for competency, and that is in terms of engineering, procurement, construction, getting to know the details, subject matter experts. It is valuing the competency that you have and ensuring that you are rewarding and preserving and nurturing that competency. You have to continue to attack, as we would say, a lot of these are schedule-driven, source of differentiation, schedule-driven, critical element. You have to attack the critical path of these jobs. And that means understanding where is the risk of delay, whether that's in craft professional labor, whether that is in terms of supply chain, whether that is in terms of critical materials. Know the areas of potential delay and attack them, whether that's through controlling the risk, by owning that supply chain, through having better relationships, better competencies, but attack it. And you have to have data-centric execution. This is not pens and paper and Excel spreadsheets that are managing and improving operations of multi-billion-dollar projects. You have to have infused, true, not just advertised and pretty-looking paper, but true data-centric execution throughout your design, procurement, construction process. So that's the things you have to rely and continue to do that. Those haven't changed. But the things that you need to really consider, and this is on the improvement side of the performance review, is you need to, especially as technology is woven throughout a lot of the products and the supply chains, is really increase your speed. So you have to increase the speed at which you're operating. You have to embrace change. Change is not a four-letter word. It is a part of these industries. It is technology change. The combination of speed and change means you have to be more agile. And that doesn't mean just doing the same processes faster. It means adapting your work processes in order to be nimble, to be ready to accept the change. And the third thing I'd say that we see on the consider, which you need to invest in getting better at, is this is not a sequence of, okay, you do A to B, B to C, C to D, and then we're going to get through a project completion. You really need to get the stakeholders together much earlier than they're usually comfortable in doing, to align on interests and to ensure that you're setting the right path forward. How does that come from a performance review perspective?
Great job.
Customer. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
My mid-years are coming up, so I hope they go so well.
All right.
Karthik, you spend time in this space. Do you have a comment to that?
So I want to pick up on what's implicit in what we heard from both of our manufacturing panelists, which is there's a tremendous role for labor here, notwithstanding what we talked about with AI earlier, right? And so one of the things that obviously AI will be very useful, and we should continue to invest in the capacity and so forth. But what AI will be good at doing eventually will be what we call deductive reasoning, right? Given basically a set of patterns, how will you analyze it, et cetera. Everybody on this panel, and probably everybody in this room, has a job because of inductive reasoning, or what you might call judgment, right? And that's something that, yes, of course, AI can make up something that looks like judgment. But unless we have a theory of mind, which, by the way, we're very, very far from having a theory of mind if you speak to neuroscientists about it, we have no way of knowing whether this so-called judgment that an AI model produces is anything close to approximating what human judgment involves. So the idea that we're going to replace human judgment in the context is absurd. And so we have to continue to invest in all of the skills and so forth that we're talking about, recognizing, of course, the tremendous tool that AI presents in the context of deductive reasoning, right? And that is something that often gets lost in the sort of the debates around this, and in some sense, the exuberance around AI.
Yeah, lots of exuberance. Also, lots of exuberance about numbers. I mean, $30 billion project here, $15 billion project there. Eventually it adds up. You're talking about trillions of investment needed, incremental investment needed annually. So, Julian, the trend has been the other way. There are actually more barriers to investment in a lot of countries, including this one, across the EU. Where do we get the money?
Yeah, look, I think you can see the big numbers, and I think they're big and they're scary. I mean, I think, look, if you take the sort of last McKinsey report I saw was for 4 trillion per annum that you'd need to sort of hit targets for the energy transition, and we're at about 2 in terms of what we're currently at today. But that 4 seems a big number, but just to put it in context, if you take that as a percentage of global GDP, it's actually the same percentage of US GDP that was deployed into the railroads sort of a century ago. If you look at the sort of tech boom 20, 30 years ago, it's the same percentage of money, GDP, at the time that went into the sort of tech space. So we've been there before. It's just a matter of how do we move the capital. And I guess, look, that's our job as a bank in terms of sitting in those capital flows I was talking about earlier. The challenge, I think, with the the energy transition spaces, there's lots of venture capital money, and there's lots of infrastructure capital ready to play once it's cash flow. The space where there's a gap is the sort of growth capital. And look, that's a truism in some ways, because that's always the case, right? But because the numbers are so big to scale, particularly in the energy transition, and it's CapEx heavy, it's not like tech startup going to something else, right? And because AI requires all the energy alongside it, it's still a big number, and it's the same kind of challenge. So that's I think what we're dealing with. And I think two thoughts really. One, on the project finance side, look, I think to make those things work, you need the combination of the stability that you were talking about, Catherine, right, in terms of the framework that gives people that kind of comfort. I think you've got to have the supply chain visibility, which we've also, all of us, talked about, and I've heard lots today. I think the places where there's some space to, I think, hopefully mobilize more money faster is by using things like carbon credits. We've just done a project in Africa where we effectively didn't have the visibility on the offtake, but we had visibility on the sort of carbon credits that would come with the project, and so you were financing against that. The other thing I think is insurance. I think the insurance market is becoming way more creative, and we're finding that a really important piece of the jigsaw. But look, even if you put all that together, if we try and hit that 4 trillion target in project finance only, I think it's a challenge, right? And that comes back to kind of corporate balance sheets. And the way to maybe frame that, the way we think about it as a bank, and there may be a challenge to all the corporates that are engaged in the room and otherwise. The way we think about it as a bank is, look, if a big corporate were to ask us to write them a check off their current cash flows for $1 billion and write it bilateral, I could probably get that approved in a week if it was a good client. That $1 billion could then be spent on lots of project finance deals, and then once the projects have happened, we could then refinance them, and it would be easier, quicker, and lower cost of capital for the corporate as well. So one of my slight sort of challenges when I'm sat in a room with companies saying, or with stakeholders saying, well, why are we not deploying more? Well, we've made a $1.5 trillion commitment in terms of what we will commit to the energy transition, but we have to get it for the right projects. And if someone's not ready to back that as an equity owner, effectively with an offtake contract or with equity, or their venture capital arm saying, I'm in the business, then it's not really a question for the banks, because we'll be there if that's in a different way. And then the last bit, I guess, is getting to the really, really big commitments, and there's been a lot of big numbers talked about today, especially when you look at what is needed on the AI plus energy challenge. You go back to when the European gas industry got built, again, it wasn't done on balance sheet. It was built by if you look in Germany, it was BP, Shell, Exxon, and the German government built all the infrastructure, built all the storage capacity, and later they refinanced it and listed it, right? So again, my sort of, how do we crack the code here? It's actually, if we've got the vision, then actually whether it's sort of government capital in some shape or form, or corporates, whether that's the tech companies, the hyperscalers, and maybe it's more the tech guys than the hyperscalers because they've got investment-grade balance sheets. That's where we as banks can deploy at pace and at scale, and then refinance at a project finance level after the projects are actually moving. So.
Yeah, so I mean, couldn't agree more about the mechanics of how this would work. I'd say there isn't a shortage of capital in the world. We've come out of a period of historically cheap money, so we have a lot of capital in the world. And it's not like there's a shortage of people pitching ideas, right? I think it's not a supply problem, it's a demand problem in the sense of, is there really, at the end of the day, a viable market on the other side to justify the deployment of capital? Now, one of the lessons we've learned over the history of capital markets is that information supply creates its own demand, right? So robust information supply is really important in order to discriminate across demand signals. And you think about it, up until the year 1935, it's hard to believe today, the term generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, didn't exist in the English language or in any other language. And every company that traded on the New York Stock Exchange in the 1920s, during the Roaring '20s, made up its own definition of assets, made up its own definition of revenue, made up its own definition on contingent liability recognition, right? And they didn't even have to tell you what those definitions were. So it's no surprise that there wasn't enough sort of, capital being deployed to effectively useful projects. And you had a lot of snake oil on markets. You eventually ended up with a bubble and then a crash. And so in the 1930s, we said, well, wouldn't it be a good idea if we all use the same definition of an asset? And guess what that does? it opens the door to all kinds of new projects that you wouldn't otherwise be able to identify, right? So part of what we need to do today is basically say, how can we create a robust, consistent, comparable, verifiable system of accounts that allow us to discriminate across the various opportunities that are out there? There's a lot of junk bonds and a lot of junk opportunities associated with so-called carbon offsets today, which is why companies don't want to put money into it. And then there's some really good opportunities out there. But unless we have a way to discriminate across that, we're not going to be able to shift the demand curves the way we need to, right? So this problem is not the supply of capital. And you see a lot of people saying, well, where is the capital needed for the green transition? The capital's right here, right? It's that we don't have the good demand signals yet. And that's what we need to fix.
We have less than a minute left, so I'm going to do one rapid fire. So to each of you, if we're sitting here 10 years from now, who are what regions of the world or what countries, if you would say, you think will really be the winners in reindustrialization, have got the right policy frameworks, et cetera? And where are you, I won't say losers, but where are those that you think more work needs to be done to innovate?
I mean, I think the country we're sitting in will certainly be one of the biggest winners. It's our largest market in the world, and we're going to contribute to that. I think Europe has to refocus on competitiveness and reindustrialization, not by deindustrialization. And so I think that there's some work to be done in Europe to bring that back to manufacturing stronghold.
I won't necessarily pick a geographic winner, but I'd say the attributes that will shine through are going to be the places that have the patience and the fortitude to commit to long-term, the capital intensity in which these industries have. Those that can commit and fulfill their commitment to these capital projects over time. And the second would be the pace of change is just so much faster than every day. You know, the rate of change is increasing, and so the winner will be that which embraces the change and actually gets good at change in and of itself.
Look, I think the US should be a winner if you think ultimately what are the drivers, technology and low-cost energy. So put those two together. You're never going to bet against China in terms of just decision-making and just getting things done. I guess, look, not just because we've had Dr. Sultan here, but I think, look, that if you look at the Middle East and say, look, with the right framework, again, low energy costs and a really clear vision as to what they're trying to achieve, I think they're going to be winners. India, just from a sort of low-cost people, workforce, et cetera. And then the one, just to throw it out there, is it does come down to us as banks. I was at a multilateral development bank session earlier, and the MDB's driving it. But you look at somewhere like Africa, maybe this is more like 20 plus years going forward. You know, you've got 60% of the world's solar resource right there. You've got about 30% of the relevant renewable metals and so on. But currently only kind of 2% of the invested kind of capital going to Africa. If that shifts, I think Africa is going to be a big force going forward.
So in the book, Alice Through the Looking Glass, the Red Queen says to Alice, now here you see it takes all the running you must do to stay where you are. If you want to get anywhere, you have to run twice as fast. So the countries that will win are the ones who are willing to run twice as fast.
Great. All right, well, thank you all so much. You're all at the front lines of building this new manufacturing economy. So thank you for that work, for that efforts, and for taking some time with us today.